Welcome back to the Democratic primary debate, and we keep things going with a very serious topic here. Governor Pritzker's brother, Tom Pritzker, stepped down as executive chairman of Hyatt Hotels after it was revealed he kept in contact with Jeffrey Epstein after he pled guilty to procuring a child for prostitution and soliciting a prostitute. Should all people mentioned in the Epstein files be forced to resign from public and private positions? If no, how should people be held accountable for their association to Epstein? Lieutenant Governor Stratton, let's begin with you. 60 seconds.
Well, first, let me be clear that no one should be protecting pedophiles, certainly not the Attorney General of the United States. And I'm looking at how this is playing out. We're not seeing the transparency or the accountability that we should see. And this is an example of how Pam Bondi is working to protect those that are wealthy and powerful. It's almost like there's two different systems of justice. And when people have been directly investigated and directly connected and have committed a crime, they should be held accountable. But I also believe that anybody who knew of what Epstein was doing in trafficking children and was aware of it and associated with him after that point, they also should not escape consequences, whether it's losing their job, their business, or harm to their reputation. It should happen because we cannot let them go without accountability.
Congresswoman Kelly, how should people be held accountable for association with Epstein?
I think if your name is in there, you need to be investigated. There needs to be oversight. When you said they're forced to resign, many of them are the CEOs, so they're taking it upon themselves to resign. And I attribute that to they know that they did something wrong, or like what Mr. Pritzker said, it's bad for the company, but everyone needs to be held accountable. The president, all the CEOs, all the well-off and well-connected, and we must do everything we can to protect the victims. That is extremely important, which did not happen. All of their names were not redacted. And I actually have met with some of the victims, and they're very upset that we are not holding people accountable. There's not that transparency. And of course, Pam Bondi, as we saw, is, she's playing to an audience of one and protecting the president, or playing to what the president wants. But everyone needs to be investigated, no matter who you are, no matter what party, what position. Everyone needs to be investigated.
You're referring to U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, 60 seconds.
Yes, if they're implicated in any way, in a serious way, they should resign. And more should be done. Today we learned that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested, and that is perhaps the first criminal action that's come about because of our work on the Oversight Committee and in Congress in releasing the Epstein files. I spent hours meeting with the victims of this child sex trafficking ring. There were thousands of then girls who are now middle-aged women who've yet to receive a single measure of justice. A single measure of justice, despite being abused by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and other co-conspirators. Because of that, it stiffened the resolve of people like me and others to get to the bottom of what's happened. We need to get all the files released. I had a chance to review the unredacted files, and all the people in there who are named also need to be released as well.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Governor Stratton, you've been Governor Pritzker's sidekick now for almost a decade. You've mentioned him several times tonight. Now that you're breaking off on your own, tell us about any policy differences that you have with the governor, and how are you different than he is as a leader? You have 60 seconds.
Well, one of the things that I'm very proud of is the relationship that we have had as partners in governance over the last 7 years. But we're two different people, and we come from different backgrounds, and we bring different perspectives. And I think that's what made the partnership so strong. A good example that I would give is that in 2024, I called the governor and said, I'm very proud of the work that we've done here in Illinois to make Illinois an island of reproductive freedom in the Midwest. But black women are still dying, and they're dying at a rate of 3 times that of our white counterparts due to pregnancy-related complications, and we need to do something. And he immediately said, absolutely. And I ended up leading the Birth Equity Initiative here in the state. And now, because of my leadership, doulas, midwives, lactation consultants are all covered, whether you have Medicaid or private insurance, with no copay, and women's lives are being saved. It's an example of how my perspective at the table brought some different results.
Your time is up for that, but I'm going to do a quick 30-second follow-up if you don't mind. So if and when you get to become Senator of Illinois, you plan on doing something like that on the federal level?
I'd
Or
love to do
introducing it?
I'd love to do something like that when I become the next United States Senator. We need to address the maternal mortality crisis, and what I see Illinois as being is the blueprint for what's possible at the federal level. And it's not just around the Birth Equity Initiative, it's how we've raised wages, it's how we've created thousands of jobs, it's how we put Illinois on a path to a clean energy future, passed an assault weapons ban. Those are things that I've been a part of doing, and now I want to take that Illinois blueprint to Washington, D.C.
Congresswoman Kelly, a question for you. You were head of the Democratic Party of Illinois for 1 year before
16 months.
Governor Pritzker's selection sort of stopped you from getting a second term. And you were quoted in the New York Times over the weekend saying this. It's on the screen. This is the rubber match, you know. I've won one. He won one. It should be about her, not JB, but he's definitely, with all his money, gotten into the race. So, Congresswoman, is this campaign about you and Governor Pritzker? 60
I
seconds.
hope not. I don't, you know, he's definitely involved in the race. You can't drop $5 million plus and not be involved in the race, but it should be about the lieutenant governor, not about him. But no, he's definitely involved in the race. And when it was tongue in cheek when I said it was the rubber match, because if she know I win and he wins, it doesn't matter, you know. But yeah, I mean, I know people try to make a big issue of me and the governor, but we've talked, and you know, I don't have any grudge or anything like that. I don't know what he thinks. I don't think he does, because we have had our conversation, but it shouldn't be about him. But he's inserted himself. I'll just put it like that.
Did he apologize for backing someone else, or was it just...
I wasn't looking for an apology for him to back someone else, but I think he was trying to, it was a little icy, I'll put it like that, and the ice was on my part. And I think that he was, you know, we both care about Illinois. I'm trying to do my job, and he's trying to do his job. And I think that he was just trying to say, let's, you know, not kumbaya, but, you know.
Well, no, because he's backing Stratton. But yeah.
If I could do a quick 30-second follow-up. So when you look over there, do you see the governor or do you see the lieutenant governor? Who do you see?
I've known Juliana quite a few years. We worked together at the county. No, I have respect for her. I see her.
All right.
He may be behind her, but I see her.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, you released a list of endorsements by more than 30 current and former members of the U.S. House. No incumbent member of the Illinois congressional delegation has endorsed your campaign. What message does that send to voters about your relationships with local colleagues? 60 seconds.
I think my relationship is excellent with them, and I have a tremendous amount of congressional support. We released a list of more than 30 members of Congress that support me. But more than that, we have tremendous numbers of unions. I have the most union support of anyone on this stage. I also have 100 downstate leaders, the most of anyone on this stage, 50 Latino pastors, 100 black pastors, as well as others. And so I'm proud of kind of the rank and file leaders that are behind me. They know me as well as anyone because I work with them every day, and I'm so proud to have their support.
Do you see more endorsements coming?
I do. Yes, ma'am.
We want to move on to foreign policy. There's been renewed focus on the United States' support for Israel and what conditions should be placed on military aid to Israel. We're going to start with you, Congressman Krishnamurthy. You have the first 60 seconds to answer.
Well, right now, there are a variety of conditions placed on aid to Israel, including the Leahy laws, the Foreign Assistance Act laws, Arms Export Control Act laws, and they need to be enforced at all times. Not just with Israel, but also with Jordan, also with Egypt, and any other country that receives any aid from the United States. Right now, I am fighting like heck for a two-state solution in the region. I strongly condemn Hamas's attack on Israel in October of 2023, and then I strongly criticize Netanyahu for his conduct of the war. But now, finally, there's a ceasefire, fragile as it is. Hostages have been released, humanitarian aid is coming in, but we need to take the next step. That means Israel needs to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Hamas needs to be demilitarized. An international stabilization force has to arrive. And then massive construction aid has to come in to the point where we have a chance at a road to a two-state solution, a Palestinian and Israeli states living side by side.
You mentioned, if I can do a 30-second follow-up, that a lot of those rules have not been enforced. If and when you become the senator, how can you make them become enforced? What can you do?
I think you do that through your oversight in Congress. And you have to make sure that whatever conditions are attached to any aid that we provide, whether it's monetary or whether it's military, it has to be enforced. So whether it's Ukraine or Israel or any other country, we need to make sure that the aid is utilized in a way that's consistent with the will of the American people.
Lieutenant Governor Stratton, conditions on military aid to Israel, what do you support?
Well, let me first just start by saying, as I always do, that this is more than just policy. We're talking about people. And as a mom of 4, when I think about the devastation that has happened, both on October 7th and every day since, it's horrifying. And I want to see the suffering end. I can tell you that as our Democratic ally in the Middle East, I believe that Israel has a right to safety and security. But at the very same time, I totally disagree with the way that Netanyahu has responded to those attacks. And I believe that he should be removed from power, or he should step down, and there should be elections, as the people have been calling for. We need to make sure that there is aid to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We need to make sure that Gaza is rebuilt. What concerns me the most is that we don't have leadership either in the White House, and certainly not through Prime Minister Netanyahu, to really make sure that we get on the path to sustained peace and towards a two-state solution.
Congresswoman Kelly, you are a co-sponsor of the Block the Bombs Act, which would block the president from selling or exporting the most destructive offensive weapon systems to Israel. What do you believe this is the most effective strategy? 60 seconds.
Well, I think it's one of the effective strategies, not the only strategy, but this was the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians in Gaza. And I think that, you know, we need to have Block the Bomb. We need to, I believe phase 2 is Netanyahu needs to step down, that he's such a destructive leader. I call Kristi Noem reign of terror, but that is him too. And also, a lot of people would say what happened on October 7th was horrible, but there were a lot of things that happened before October 7th also. And the reason I signed Block Netanyahu talked about they're lying, people are totally untrue. And I'm the only one on the stage that has supported something like Block the Bomb. And I'm the only one on this stage that said it may not have started off like this, but it did end up genocide was the result.
Well, we have a follow-up for all three of you. By some estimates, the conflict in Gaza has claimed the lives of more than 70,000 people. And would you vote in favor of Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib's resolution declaring genocide in Gaza? We're going to start with you, Lieutenant Governor, for 30 seconds on this one.
Well, as I said earlier, even tonight, and as I have consistently said, I've made my point clear that what has happened is horrific, and the devastation and the suffering that we have seen is terrible. And we must do everything we can to make sure that we can be on a real sustained path to peace.
So you'd vote in favor
and I
of the
also want to
resolution?
make sure that we have real support and humanitarian aid, food, health care, and everything to address what we see, which is a humanitarian
So you'd vote in
crisis.
favor of the resolution?
What I would say is that it was devastating and it was horrific to see.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, is what happened in Gaza genocide?
It's a serious question. I think that the issue is this, which is that the parties in the region don't agree on a credible assessment of what exactly happened. And right now they're extremely divided about describing what happened. My concern is this, which is that division getting in the way of progress right now in this fragile ceasefire. If that gets in the way of progress, then we're going to go back to war. And we can't let that happen. That would be the worst outcome right now.
Is it genocide, and would you support the resolution?
I want to see the language, but I need to be comforted right now that this type of resolution doesn't get in the way of progress right now for Gazans, because right now they're going through hell. as it is, and we got to get to a better place.
Congresswoman Kelly, 30 seconds to answer. Would you support this resolution? And is this genocide?
Well, as I just said, that it may not have started off being like that, but I believe that is what it turned into. And I've spoken to Israelis, I've spoken to American doctors that have gone to Gaza, I've spoken to two men that found each other, one Palestinian and one Israeli, that both lost relatives. So I would say yes, it is. I haven't read her resolution, but as I just said, I think it was genocide.
Sticking with foreign policy, Iran held live military exercises this week in the Strait of Hormuz, just as nuclear talks between the United States and Iran were set to resume. U.S. warships have been moved into the region. President Trump has threatened military action and called for a regime change if diplomacy fails. What should the U.S. do about Iran if diplomacy fails? Congressman Krishnamurthy, 60 seconds.
Well, first of all, Iran should not be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. It cannot have a nuclear weapon given that it wants to destroy America and Israel and other countries in the Middle East. That being said, we must negotiate an end to its nuclear weapon diplomatically. That is absolutely crucial. In concert with our friends, partners, and allies, not only ending the nuclear program, but also ending the ballistic missile program and ending its support of terrorist groups throughout the region. Now, if the Trump administration wants to come to Congress and say military activity is necessary, they must do so under the War Powers Act, and I'm joining that resolution right now because the American people do not want war. They do not want another endless war in the Middle East. And if the president disagrees, he needs to come to the American people and get their consent before deploying troops or getting us involved in any kind of strike on Iran.
Very quickly, since you're in Congress now, 30 seconds, well, it's a yes or no. President Trump could strike as soon as this weekend. Would that be legal?
No.
Okay. All right, Congresswoman Kelly, 60 seconds. What do you do if talks fail?
He came to this presidency saying he was going to be the peace president, and he has not been that at all. He changed the Department of Defense to the Department of War. I actually feel like he's looking for trouble and that he wants us to get into some type of, arms issue because it's a distraction for the things that he's not doing in his own country for the American people. We need to do everything we can in a diplomatic way. We need to bring third-party people, whatever we need to do, because, again, American people are sick of, our soldiers dying overseas. So we need to do everything we can. He does need to come to Congress and get, our approval of it, but we need to bring every tool we have in the toolbox, whether it's the UN, third-party countries, whoever, to help us negotiate, because no more war.
Would a strike this weekend be legal? Yes or no? Lieutenant Governor Stratton, 60 seconds.
Certainly. Well, we certainly don't want to see a nuclear Iran. We know that. But what we also can't have is a president who just decides whenever he gets a whim to just say, this is what I'm going to do, and threatens to strike or commit some sort of act of war. And we need Congress to rein him in. He should not be taking any such actions without going before Congress. And to answer your question that I'm anticipating, it would be illegal for him to do so. So we need to make sure that he is held accountable to Congress and does not just go out and make these kinds of decisions. I, too, would support the War Powers Act resolution, and we need to make sure that this president does not feel like he just has free rein to act without following the Constitution.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, do you think President Trump has committed any impeachable offense? And if elected, would you vote for him to be impeached? Lieutenant Governor Stratton.
I would support impeachment efforts. However, as I always say, this president has been impeached twice, and now he's sitting in the White House. And we're looking at what he is doing. So we need real fighters in Washington right now. When I go around the state, more than anything else, more than any policy position or anything else that we might even talk about tonight, what I hear from people more than anything else is, I'm looking for someone to go to the mat fighting for me. And I'm proud that I can look them in the eye and say I will be that fighter. I'm going to stand toe-to-toe with Donald Trump. And I'm going to do everything I can to stop his authoritarian agenda. I'm not going to confirm any of his appointees to the Supreme Court. I'm not going to confirm any of his appointees to the cabinet. I'm going to use my bully pulpit to speak out just as we have done here in Illinois when he's threatened to come and federalize troops and do everything else. I've stood up to Donald Trump, and I'll continue to do so as the next United States Senator.
I have a 30-second follow-up for you. You put out a campaign ad today that says blank Trump. Why is this your closing message instead of highlighting your plans for office or the differences with your opponents?
This ad really, as I just said, it captures exactly what people are feeling right now. They feel like, look at Washington. People aren't happy with what's happening in Congress. They're wondering why nothing is changing in their lives. Everything is getting more expensive. And here they are wondering, when are we going to stand up and not let this president just get away with what he's doing? So this is the energy that I'm feeling in the streets. And I think the ad pretty much captured it well.
Quickly a follow-up to that, what happened to when they go low, we go high?
Well, we're not talking about a normal president. We're not even talking about a normal person. Donald Trump is a wannabe dictator who stomps on the Constitution, overlooks the rule of law, and every single day, whether it's what we're seeing in our communities with ICE, wants to make the presence of the military normalized on American soil against American citizens. I'm not going to stand for it. I'm going to fight back.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, 60 seconds to answer. Has President Trump committed impeachable offenses? Would you vote for an impeachment? Would it make a difference?
I believe he has, and I think that we should start an impeachment inquiry, which is the first step. I helped to lead the first impeachment inquiry of President Trump. I voted twice to impeach the president. For some of my efforts, Florida MAGA politicians asked for me to be deported. And my name was included in the Minnesota murderers' notes in part because of my outspokenness with regard to Donald Trump. Look, when the president says the other day that the only thing that's holding him in check is his own morality, we know that we're in trouble. He doesn't have morality. He doesn't have a moral compass. He's about himself. He's about putting his private, personal interests above those of the public. And we see that in so many different realms. And so we've got to hold him accountable. That is something that comes out loud and clear when we talk to constituents, when I go around the state. And that is what is necessary now. I spent a career of standing up to bullies and bad actors, and now I need to stand up to Donald Trump.
Congresswoman Kelly, excuse me.
I voted for impeachment twice, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court has given him so much reign, and he's taken advantage of every piece of reign they have given him. But that's why I've impeached or filed impeachment papers against Kristi Noem, because that's a way of getting to him, because she's following, what he wants to follow. So if we can start working on his secretaries, whether it's Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, Kennedy, all the incompetent leaders that he has surrounded himself with. But yes, he definitely is worthy of impeachment because of all the things that he's doing. It's unprecedented times. And whether we think things might happen or not, we should still move forward on it. So I would definitely vote for that, or for him to be impeached, or start the inquiry.
All right, it is time for closing statements. We're almost done. Aren't you happy? You'll each have 30 seconds for this. We're going to start with you, Congresswoman Kelly.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you to WGN, thank you to the moderators, and thank you to the viewing audience. I am Robin Kelly, and I'm running very hard to be your next U.S. Senator. I'm running because I want to make your life more affordable and make your life better. Frankly, it pisses me off that Donald Trump and his billionaire and millionaire friends have only gotten richer while others have struggled and are being squeezed. It also pisses me off that these same millionaires and billionaires are trying to buy this election, and that should piss you off. Yes, the Senate needs a fighter, but the Senate needs a winner too. It's not just enough to fight. You have to have accomplishments, and I have a long list of them, and I want to be your next senator.
All right, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, your turn. Closing statement.
Well, let me talk directly to the voters tonight. These are urgent times, and I can tell you that I'm hearing it everywhere. People are fed up with what's happening in Washington. And if you're happy with what's happening in Washington right now, if you're okay with what's happening with Congress, then maybe I am not your candidate. But if you're looking for a bold leader, if you're looking for a courageous leader, if you want somebody who's going to fight for you every single day and get things done like we've done in Illinois, then please, I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you so much to WGN. I'm running to preserve, protect, and defend the American dream, which I believe is under mortal attack from Donald Trump. I believe the fundamental question in this particular election is this: what kind of a government do we want? Do we want a government that's there for those fighting to make it, or one that primarily caters to those who have it made? I believe we want a government that tries to nurture the American dream for everyone, regardless of the color of your skin or regardless of the number of letters in your name. There are 29 in mine. And that's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate. I thank you for your consideration.
Why not 30?
I'm sorry?
30 letters in your name. Add another one.
Round up. Why not? Let's do it.
He was
Nearest
able to
10.
sneak that in. All right. This is the end of our debate with the Democratic U.S. Senate candidates in Illinois. Thank you to our participants.
And to our viewers at home, thank you for watching. Early voting has already started statewide. Election Day is March 17th.
We hope you'll join us then to watch the votes come in. Good night.
Be safe, be well. Bye-bye.